Hello, this is Ben with Mission Cloud. Today we're doing another video walkthrough. We're going to talk about IAM access keys. If we consult the documentation on IAM access keys, it's going to tell us that it's best practice to rotate our keys out. It doesn't say, I don't think in the documentation exactly how often you should rotate them out, but what I generally tell people is 90 days. That's good for both IAM passwords and IAM keys. Now, in the documentation, it does say, where possible, we recommend relying on temporary credentials instead of creating long-term credentials such as access keys. So we won't go into too much detail on that today. Just know that when you have the option, it's better to use IAM roles as opposed to IAM users and policies attached to users and groups. Preferably, you would use IAM roles because that just allows temporary access through STS. But in certain cases, we do need IAM users. So today we will go through how to rotate out our access keys. Okay, let's jump into some hands-on. If we're looking at the documentation for IAM best practices, we'll have a little bit of a link here to rotating access keys. So I've already got that open in another tab. We'll look at that. You could do it a few different ways. You could do it in the console, CLI, and API. We'll focus on the console for now. If there's time, without making the video too long and drawn out, we'll do CLI as well. But for now, we'll just focus on console. First thing you need to note is, well, in my opinion, first thing you need to note is where are your keys actually stored? What do you use them for? You use your IAM access keys for programmatic access to your AWS account, right? So you can create resources through the CLI. You can get information on your resources. You can do all sorts of things in the CLI. Now you store these on your, you can store them on EC2s. You can also store them on your own workstation, which is generally what I use it for. So if you want to know if you have the AWS CLI installed, you could probably just type AWS and that'll tell you whether or not you have it installed because it's going to give you either a list of help commands or it's going to do nothing, give you an error. In that case, you probably need to first install the AWS CLI. So you could just Google that, how to install the AWS CLI. Once you have that done, then you're going to want to install a set of access keys. You don't need to know necessarily where these keys are stored, but I'll show you real quick on a Mac at least, just in case. If we go to .aws, which is a hidden folder, in here, we'll see a couple of files, or folders rather. We'll see config and credentials. If we cat out our credentials file, it'll give us some of the access keys that I've used in the past. Don't worry that I'm exposing these. I don't have any use for them anymore. I'm going to delete them at the end of the video. Just wanted to show you where you can find them. So what do these keys actually belong to in my AWS account? Well, if we pop over to the account and we go into IAM, we see we have one user. That's me. We can look at password age. We can look at active key age. I don't have a password. That's fine. Active key age is only 2 days old, so I don't necessarily need to rotate my keys, but I'm doing it just for the sake of the example. Last activity is interesting. You can click on this. It'll tell you if the person's ever logged into the console or if they've used their access keys for anything. You can see that I have used my keys 2 days ago and they're only 2 days old. These things are kind of throwaway though, unless you're using them for an application. You don't necessarily need to keep them long term. It's kind of better that you don't, since this whole video is about rotating them. Point being, you don't need to necessarily keep them for 90 days. You can rotate them as often as you want to. I just wouldn't keep them for longer than 90 days. So if we go into my IAM user and we click on security credentials, we can scroll down a little bit and you can see access keys here, right? And access key ID, you can have up to 2 per user. Uh, Whichever one I'm not using, I usually set it inactive for a while to make sure I'm not forgetting anything that might be using it. And then after a little while, I'll delete it. And then I'll usually have one active access key. So I can go ahead and make this one inactive. If we want to rotate them out, what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and delete both. This shorter string is the access key ID. Oops, I didn't want to make that active. I want to delete it. First, we have to deactivate it. So this shorter string is the access key ID. So once we get rid of those, we can create a new pair. As soon as I click on this, it's going to create a new pair of access keys for me. So look, what do we have here? The access key ID, that's the shorter string. The secret access key is a longer string. This is the one that's kind of like your password. You can kind of look at these as a username and password. Now, in order to actually use these, what we have to do is place them into our CLI, either in an EC2 for some sort of application usage or our workstation. So I'm going to plug them into my workstation. I'll grab this access key ID here. And what you would type after you have the AWS CLI installed is AWS configure. That'll prompt you for your access keys. So you can see access key ID. I'm just going to overwrite that with my new key. And then the secret access key, I will overwrite that. Default region name, it just kind of depends on wherever you're, either if you want low latency to your console, wherever's closest to you. You know, you've got regions all over the world. And then default's usually just going to go to US East 1. Output format, sometimes it's none, sometimes you can put JSON, something like that. Okay, so we have our keys created. We did that in the console. We've installed them in the CLI. Now we can actually use our keys. If you wanted to see an example of how we could use our keys, we could do something like making an S3 bucket. So we could just do that real quickly for example's sake. Our commands will be AWS S3 MB for make bucket, S3, and then we'll put in a bucket name that has to be globally unique. Hopefully that's unique enough. And then we have a bucket, and then we could say AWS S3 LS and get our bucket names. This obviously isn't the only bucket that I have in the account, but now we can see the bucket I just created right here. That's great. And let's play around with the CLI a little bit. Let's see how to rotate our keys out via the CLI. So maybe we don't want to have to go into the console and click buttons every time. We don't have to. We could do it right in the CLI. This is kind of directed towards doing it for applications. As I mentioned, you might use your access keys for applications, but you also might use them for individual users. So this applies to both. This is actually directed towards using it for applications. What it's saying is rotate access keys without interrupting your applications. What you do is you create a new key, you point your applications to the new key, you do some testing to see when the key is being used, and then you can update the old key and deactivate it for a while and wait and make sure nothing breaks, and then eventually you delete the key. For our sake, even though we're just using it from the workstation, we can still run through this real quickly just for the example so you know how to do it in the CLI as well. So we can say AWS IAM create access key. Now keep in mind we're actually already using an access key. We had to use our own access keys to create this new key, so now we have two. Next, what we would do, if we were using this for an application, we would point our applications to the new key, but we are not doing that. We don't need to worry about that. We also see we have our secret access key here. I'm going to delete all these at the end of the video. But what we could do next is we can see AWS IAM get access key last used. Now I believe this will throw an error unless we put in some arguments. So let's just see what help it gives us. So it says access key ID is a required argument. So we need to put that in. We'll go back to our original access keys. I had a typo when I put the command in the first time, so I had to stop the video, clear my screen, and start over here. So what we were doing is checking the last usage of our active key. So what we would do is say AWS IAM get access key last used. We have to put in our access key here, and it'll tell us the last time that was used. That's great. So we can see it was used today, right now, in fact. If we wanted to update that key to be inactive, we can use the CLI as well. So we'll say AWS IAM update access key. You'll also get errors if you just try to run this command as is, but it'll give us useful information that we need. So we also need the access key ID here. So we'll put in the same one. And then status, let's make it inactive. And we got one more error here as well. I could remove these from the videos, but I assume a lot of people will go through kind of the same pains as they do this in the CLI. So I figure it's better to leave it in, and then you can see exactly how I fix these issues. So the error we got was inactive is not a valid argument. I think it looks like it's just because I didn't make it capitalized. So we'll try that again. And now that worked. So that key is inactive. That's our original key. We had created a new set of keys. We can configure our CLI with that new set of keys, and then eventually we can run the command to delete the old set of keys. So you get the idea. That's how we go into the console and the CLI and rotate out our IAM access keys. Now remember, as I said in the beginning of the video, best practice would be to do this every 90 days. There are automation techniques if you don't want to do this every single 90 days. Maybe you think it's kind of a pain. You can research how to do it through some automation. We can use Lambda functions in conjunction with Secrets Manager, and that can all be run in a CloudFormation template for you, so you don't have to do it every time by yourself. Just running it in the CLI like this, it can get kind of old, especially if you're an enterprise and you have maybe hundreds or even thousands of users. Again, the best practice there is going to be use IAM roles. But if you have to have users and you have to rotate their keys every 90 days, you either have to do it this way manually or you can look into the automation that I mentioned. This has been with Mission Cloud. Thank you and have a great day.